Hi everybody and welcome to show number 7 in my little Whisky 101 sessions. My name's Kieran Elliott. I work for the Edrington Company. Edrington has Macallan, Highland Park, Glenrothes, Famous Grouse, which is a blend. Those are our scotches. Partida Tequila, Brugal Rum. We also have 2 American whiskies, Wyoming, and Noble Oak. Fantastic boutique spirits company. And Highland Park is probably one of my top 3, if I'm going to be honest, single malts in the world. Macallan is fantastic. I was the national brand ambassador for Macallan for 5 years, but there's something special about Highland Park that sets it apart, completely different to Macallan. It's made in a different way, different distillery, different area. So a great brand, and it's a great one to get to know. But to understand the brand, you really have to understand the location. Highland Park is the most northerly distillery in Scotland. Some people call it the most northerly distillery in the world. I'm not sure if that has been beaten yet, but it is way up there on the Isles of Orkney. Now, Orkney are a collection of 70 islands off the north coast of Scotland, only 17 of which are inhabited. It's a wild and blustery, windy place, absolutely incredible place to survive. But people have been living there, stupidly, for thousands of years, braving the elements, probably using a little nip of Highland Park to survive the cold winters. But nothing wrong with that. Now, the islands themselves, Orkney, and also the Shetland Islands, which are even further up north, these islands are dominated by Norse history and mythology. Norway owned the Isles of Orkney, even though they're just off the top of Scotland. Norway owned those islands up until 1469, right? Belonged to Norway. And then they promised a bunch of money for a wedding. There was a Scotland-Norway wedding going on amongst the royalty, and they offered a bunch of money as a royal dowry for the wedding. And then when it came to it, they couldn't pay up on the dowry. So Scotland annexed Orkney and Shetland. So we basically took these islands as payment for this wedding in the expectation that we would get the money eventually, but the money never came and we kept the islands. Now, a third of the people who live on Orkney, and probably Shetland as well, a third of them are Vikings, like direct descendants from Vikings. There's a lot of Viking blood, and they also feel of themselves as different to the Scots. They see themselves as being more Norse, and in fact the flag of Orkney almost directly mimics the flag of Norway. So they're steeped in that lovely Norse mythology. And that extends to the brand itself. The brand Highland Park was started by a guy called Magnus Jonsson. Now, with a name like Magnus Jonsson, you know he is a direct descendant of the Vikings, right? So Magnus Jonsson was a church beadle during the day. He worked in the church, helped out, was part of the whole church crew during the day, and then at night he was illicitly distilling Scotch whisky, and he was hiding the bottles in the church. So he had this lovely sort of patina of, I'm a good guy, I work at the church, but he's hiding the bottles in the church. And there's one very tall tale. I wasn't around there, so I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently there was one particular incident where Magnus Jonsson was moving the bottles, and he heard that the excise guys were coming, the tax man was coming to investigate him. And he ran, he got all the bottles together, put them in the church, put them in a coffin, and put the coffin up in the altar, and everybody sort of, surrounded it, and the doors were flung open, and in comes the tax guy saying, I'm looking for people illicitly distilling whiskey. And Magnus said, oh no, this guy's recently died of the bubonic plague. You should get out of here, quick, get out of here before you catch it. And the tax guy's, no problem, Ahofsky. So great history, even before it became the brand that it is now. Phenomenal backstory. Now, it was founded in 1798, right? 4th oldest continually working Scotch distillery, 1798. But 1798 wasn't the year they started making whiskey. 1798 was the year we got caught. Up until then, they've been illicitly distilling in the mountains with some lovely stream water, burns, creeks coming down from the hillside with very clean water. Eventually, they get caught. And it wasn't until 1826 that he actually finally got the license, but he went legit and went on the books at 1798. Now, I said that's the 4th oldest distillery in Scotland. The oldest is actually my home distillery My family moved to Crieff in Scotland 25 years ago, and Glenturret is the oldest Scotch distillery, founded, where is it, 1775. Get this, 1 year before America. Fantastic. But Highland Park is the fourth oldest, founded in 1798. Now, again, I mentioned that Orkney is a crazy place to live. I said that the winds are high. What people don't realise is the wind on Orkney is over 80 miles an hour over 100 days of the year. Right? Now, that does two things. First of all, there are very few trees on the Isles of Orkney, so they can't burn wood to dry the barley, so that's why they use peat. That's why it's a peated Scotch. The second thing is, because of the strong winds, everybody on the Isles of Orkney have the same hairstyle. Like that. The people in Orkney, they're so used to leaning into the wind on those strong wind days. They're so used to leaning into the wind that you take them to the mainland and they just fall over. Anyway, so very, very strong winds, and as I said, very few trees. And of course, that means there's no wood to dry the barley, as I said. So they use peat. Now, the island Scotches, all of the Scotches on the islands up the west coast of Scotland, Lafroig, Lagavulin, Bunnahabhain, Bruichladdich, Arran, Talisker, Scapa, all of these, Coleman, all of these island Scotches tend to be peated because the islands have strong winds and they don't have a lot of trees. Now, peating, for those of you who don't know, peating is that smokiness, that bonfire, smoky element in some Scotches, not all, just some Scotches. And it tends to be, sweeping generalisation, tends to be the island malts because of that region. Because of that reason, they didn't have the trees to dry the barley. Very quickly, note on peating, because we haven't talked about the peating of whisky yet. You get the grain, you soak it in hot water to encourage it to germinate. The germination process turns the starch inside the grain into maltose, which is a much simpler sugar, easier to manipulate and break down and turn into alcohol. But then you have to halt the germination process because all the little stalks will join in, it'll be a mess, and you have to halt the germination process. So you set a fire in the floor below, a permeable floor, and the heat rises up and dries the barley, and you have to turn it over several times to make sure that it dries evenly. If you don't have coal and you don't have wood, you use peat. Peat is dense vegetation. It's been underground for maybe 9,000 years. It's on its way to becoming coal. It's been underground that long, but it's not at that point yet. It's highly acidic, so it doesn't break down fully. You dig it up, you dry it off in the Scottish sun. You dry it off in the driving rain, and you end up with these blocks of peat. And you put peat on a fire, and everybody knows what happens when you put vegetation on a fire. You get a big, thick, unctuous smoke, and that's precisely where the peated element comes from in Scotch. That smoke, very much like when you used to be able to smoke indoors in a bar, you'd have a fleece on, and you go in, you walk out, your fleece still smells of people's cigarette smoke. It's the same with the barley. The barley catches that smokiness, carries it through into the liquid. So that is a quick piece on peated Scotch. Now, I did say that the Isles of Orkney are steeped in history, and I mean steeped in history. For example, my two favourite things, there's the ring of Brodgar. The ring of Brodgar are these standing stones, kind of like Stonehenge, right? But I believe it actually predates Stonehenge. It's single monoliths. There's not a double ring. There's no T on it. Single monolith, the ring. Now, the ring of Brodgar predates the pyramids. We believe they were set up in 2500 BC. That's 4,500 years ago. That's older than the pyramids. That blows my mind. Everyone thinks, oh, the seat of civilization out there in Egypt. No, it's Orkney. Billy Connolly has a great line about this. He said that humanity, moved up through Europe, and then initially moved up into Ireland, and then eventually moved over into Scotland, which means at some point in history, somebody went off in a wee boat and came back to his pals and said, hey, follow me. I've found an even colder place. It rains all the time. Come on. Somebody must have done that to Orkney as well. Just got on one of those wee clavicle boats and got to the Isles. 9,000 of them perished in the attempt, but eventually one got there and went, yes, it rains all the time and it's really, really windy. So it rains. I'm just getting carried away because I love this history so much. So the Ring of Brodgar, 4,500 years old. My other favourite element of history on the Isles of Orkney is the scuttling at Scapa Flow. Now, Scapa Flow is this protected harbour, kind of like Pearl Harbor, a little bit, very highly protected harbour. And at the end of World War II, the message went to the German U-boats and warship set up that they had lost the war and they had to turn everything over, they had to surrender to the Allies, and they said no way, and the German warship commander scuttled the entire fleet in Scapa Flow, and it's still there. At low tide, if you go, I've just got to take this off the screen, at low tide, if you go to Scapa Flow, you see the tops of the warships and the ends of U-boats. It's fascinating. I love that sort of stuff. So that's just a little bit of history on the island itself. So very quickly, before we sort of wrap this up, I wanted to talk about what sets Highland Park aside. What is it that makes Highland Park so different, so unique, in my humble opinion? First of all, the location. Now, there is 2 single malt scotches up there. There's another one just down the road called Scapa, so it's not a unique thing to have a scotch there. But for us, it's the location up on the high field, the high moor, the high park, right? And the Isles of Orkney have a very gentle maturation arc. Now, down in Kentucky, Tennessee, when you're making a bourbon, they tend not to be older than 10, 12, 15 years old because of the high heat and high humidity. They lose a lot and it matures a little bit faster, right? Whereas on the mainland of Scotland, you've got kind of warmer summers and colder winters, but on the Isles of Orkney, it's a very, very cool summer and very, very mild winter, so they're low maturation arc. And that means they only lose about 0.5% volume-wise over the course of a year. Now, you're legally allowed to lose up to 2%, according to the taxman, so they're only losing 0.5%. So they've got a whole 1.5% that just, they can enjoy or they can experiment with or play or give out to people when they come to visit. So it's a very, very happy distillery, let's put it that way. The other thing that I think is very important that sets Highland Park aside is it's gently peated. We talked about peating in scotches, but Highland Park is the least peated, if not one of the top sort of 3 least peated scotches. Very, very low phenol count. And what that gives you is it's not overpowering, it's not peated with that sort of band-aid, burnt tyre element. The peating of a scotch is really the only time you can talk about terroir in whisky. Because the biota on each of these islands, the biological makeup, the vegetation on each of these islands is slightly different. Sometimes it's radically different, sometimes it's slightly different. Up in Orkney, because there's no trees, it's all heather and sphagnum moss. Now, when that burns, it gives a lovely, sweet barbecue smoke, a very gentle heather, light, aromatic honey smoke. Absolutely beautiful. And just to talk a little bit about that, down on Islay. Islay is the second largest Scotch producing region. The 2 that are the most heavily peated, in my opinion, Laphroaig and Lagavulin. Ardbeg is up there, but Laphroaig and Lagavulin really have that medicinal element. And it's because the ocean waves at the bottom of Islay are quite, the seas are very rough, and it threw up over decades, over millennia, threw up seaweed onto the land. And seaweed contains iodine. So seaweed got incorporated in the peat and going underground. You burn it, you're burning the iodine, it gives off a medicinal smoke. So you've got that band-aid cleaning, like the clean hospitals, that kind of, medicinal flavour. And because of that, Laphroaig and Lagavulin were the only 2 brands that were allowed to be sold legally during Prohibition in America, because they were labelled as medicinal tinctures. And from the start of Prohibition to the end of Prohibition, Walgreens went from 20 stores to 400 because they were selling medicinal tinctures. But that's that heavy medicinal peat smoke. Highland Park has a very gentle, light honey. Oh, it's beautiful. It's just a hint of smoke. Another thing that sets Highland Park aside is it benefits from the Edrington wood policy. Macallan, Highland Park and Glenrothes are our single malts, and we spend more than any other single malt distillery on our wood policy. In fact, we spend more than almost all of them put together. We spend that much on the wood policy. Almost everyone else uses ex-bourbon casks, about $100. We insist on those sherry seasoned casks. They cost about $1,000, 10 times the price. But what you get is beautiful flavours. European oak tends to have a lot more complex flavours: cinnamon, nutmeg, clove, toffees, caramels, spices, dried fruits, burnt sugars, loads going on. So we insist on those very, very flavourful casks, and that's where you get a lot of that big flavour. And then the other thing that not a lot of people realise is Highland Park is one of the most highly awarded scotches on the planet. I mean, I don't know anyone else who has won more awards. I say that honestly, and not just because I work for the brand. Highland Park won Best Spirit in the world, not Best Scotch, Best Spirit in the world, almost 3 years in a row. I think it was 2005, 6 and 8. And then F. Paul Picault, who runs the International Spirits Award, retired it from competition. He created a Hall of Fame and retired Highland Park 18 from competition. And he said, if you keep entering it, I'll keep letting it win and I'll lose my credibility. So he created a Hall of Fame. It's that good. And then we're like, okay, no problem, get it, understand. The next year, we won the same award with Highland Park 25. And it was the first time a spirit has ever got 100 out of 100. Incredible awards. The new 21, the new Highland Park 21, it's not even in the shops yet. And it's just won a bunch of awards as well. Gold, the recent Whisky Awards. So fantastic awards set up. Highly, highly awarded. So I think that's what sets it apart. Now, again, Highland Park is different, right? There's just something about Orkney, something about Highland Park. My favourite thing about Orkney is in the Guinness Book of World Records for hosting the world's most dangerous sport, right? It's called the Ba. It's played twice a year, Christmas Day and New Year's Day. And there is no rules other than there is a ball and the people in the top half of the town, Kirkwall, have to try and get the ball all the way to the harbour wall in the south. And all the people in the south are trying to get the ball all the way up to the top, to a wall way up at the top of the back of Kirkwall. Now, it's based on an incident that happened after a battle. And the king who was defeated, they chopped his head off and started playing football, like soccer, with it up and down the streets in Kirkwall. And they turned it into a game, they call it the Ba. Now, it is the most violent game on earth. There is no rules. People get carried off to hospital all the time. It's just phenomenal. And in case you're wondering which team you're on, you're either an uppie, if you're from the north half of the city, or a dooney, if you're from the southern part of the island, right? And it depends on how you got there first if you weren't born there. If you went by ferry, you're a dooney. If you came into the airport on the top, you're an uppie. So if you ever want to play in the Ba, you have to know which team you're on. But don't say I didn't warn you about the dangers. I just think it's a great opportunity to score, to settle scores. I can't believe you had it away with my sister 4 days ago. That's it. So yeah, great. I'd love to take part. I've never done it. I would absolutely love to do it. So there we are. That is the basic sort of back history of all the things that I think are interesting. These days we've gone through a rebranding and a rebottling, added a lot more Norse mythology and emblemology. If you can see that there, see the beautiful knotwork with the Highland Park on the inside, beautiful knotwork all over the bottle. And it's Highland Park 12 Viking Honour, and then Highland Park 18 Viking Pride. So we never lost our Viking roots, and that's the best thing about it. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for tuning in. I will see you next time with some information on Glenrothes. So see you then. Bye.